sure we can all relate to the Virginia Woolf quote, we're all global citizens here. The world is our home. Thank you, Marwa, for that. And many of us have already met Swedish journalist Anne Edelstam. It's good to welcome her here. And she'll be sharing her family's cross-cultural and cross-generational saga that begins with her great-grandmother in northern Sweden and ends with her in Cairo, Egypt. Let me remind you that Anne is a prolific writer and a journalist and also a photographer. Anne, can't wait to hear you share your experiences. Give her a hand, please.
I wanted to stand under nude, yes, thank you. We heard so many interesting stories and I've been so nicely introduced. Thank you, and thank you everybody. It's difficult to add at the end of this wonderful conference anything new because so much has already been said. But I'm very happy to stand here next to Nude, who swallows the sun that gives birth to the moon every day. And I'm Swedish, so I have my little fairy that I carry around. It's maybe not as powerful as Newt's. But yes, my idea about telling stories is that I think that by telling stories, we learn from each other and we learn to become more tolerant. As Marwa said here, one of the reasons I wrote this book was just to promote peace and to promote tolerance and understanding, because it's when you understand each other that you can start to have a dialogue and see the common traits that we all have among each other, because otherwise the world is so full of fear right now, and not only right now, and fear comes for not understanding, for not knowing, for being scared of the other that we don't recognize. It's maybe another religion, another culture, or whatever. I've grown up as a diplomat's daughter, so I don't really have any roots. So for me, everything is always new. You know, every 3 or 4 years, everything was always new. So I guess I've grown up with this sense of tolerance. And I also heard always as a child, you know, we are guests in this country where we live at the moment, so you have to be open and try to learn as much as possible. And that's how I was growing up. And I think that it came, as Nessie said, from already the time of my grandparents who came to Egypt. So I'll tell you a little bit about the story of my grandparents. So it started with Hilda. It started actually, I started in the book with my great-grandmother in Sweden because I wanted to explain a little bit about Sweden too, but otherwise the book is mostly about Egypt and the development of Egypt through this 100-year period from 1926 to 2012. But it's Egypt seen through our eyes, through the eyes of 3 Swedish women. So it starts in northern Sweden with my great-grandmother and my grandmother Hilda, who met my grandfather up in Sundsvall. She was skiing. She was very liberal because she skied with trousers and she didn't have a long skirt like everybody else did, and she was considered extremely advanced at the time. And she met my grandfather and they fell in love, and suddenly he tells her, well, listen, I've got a job as a judge in Cairo. And of course that was very far away from northern Sweden, totally different culture. But they were so much in love, and she waited until her parents passed away, not to leave them. And then she sold everything she had in Sweden, their house and everything, and sailed off to Africa. She brought along the grand piano, she was a pianist, the cutlery, some of her furniture, and sailed down to Egypt and arrived here in 1926. And they got married at the Swedish embassy in Cairo. It was called minister at the time. And my grandfather started as a judge in the mixed courts in Mansoura. So Mansoura was at least a small town, it's probably bigger now, up in the Delta. And the mixed courts was, just tell you shortly about the mixed courts. It was created by Nubar Pasha, an Armenian Orthodox Egyptian in 1875. And as you probably know, Egypt at the time was very cosmopolitan, so you had all these groups of Armenians, Jews, Italians, French, but they had been living in Egypt for several generations, but they could not be judged according to the Egyptian law because that was the Sharia. So they could do a bit whatever they wanted, and thus Nubar Pasha created this mixed courts where you had judges, Egyptians of course, but also from different countries and from Scandinavia, to judge cases, law cases between foreigners living in Egypt and Egyptians. So my grandfather started in Mansoura, and he thought he would only stay here for a few years, but stayed here until the mixed courts closed, and that was in 1949. So they spent the first 3 years in Mansoura, and then they moved to Cairo, that was the higher court, and my mother was born in the meantime. My mother's name is Ingrid, so she was brought up in Egypt. So for her, Egypt was her home. She went to the little school in Zamalek, for those of you who know Cairo. That's now the German embassy. And last time I was here with her, it was in November, and we went to see her little school, and she's very upset because this is German embassy. That's not at all as pretty as the little villa where she grew up. And she used to bicycle over the bridge back and forth, and all her friends were, she had a mixture of Egyptian friends and foreign friends, but she was totally, for her, she was totally Egyptian. And my grandparents also, they lived this cosmopolitan life, having a mixture of course, Scandinavian friends, but also many Egyptian friends. And my grandmother, Hilda, as I told you, she was quite an outspoken and adventurous woman. She was a nurse when she was working she was helping her father in Sweden. And when she came to Egypt, she took up photography, and she became friends with, among others, Hoda Sharawi. And for the foreigners here, maybe you don't know Hoda Sharawi so well. She's a feminist, well known for the Egyptians. But so I thought I'd read a passage with her meeting Hoda Sharawi from the book. So every summer they went to Sweden. They had 4 months holiday at the time, but it did take some time to go to Sweden from Egypt. First you had to take the train from Cairo to Alex, and then the boat. So by the time they arrived in Sweden, already 3 weeks had passed, and then the same way back. So they just came back from holiday in Sweden when I started reading this. Not everything was rosy in Egypt. One of the problems was the situation of the Egyptian woman. Not all of Hilda's friends were from well-off families. Many Egyptian women, she realized, had to cope with what seemed to her insurmountable problems. Some of those women were quite involved in politics, though, such as Hoda Sharawi, who fought for the development of her illiterate sisters. She became known as one of the most famous feminists of the early 20th century. Hilda came to admire her greatly for the courage and integrity behind her charming smile and elegant manners. They first met at a dinner party with some of Torsten Salim was her husband, colleagues, where they immediately took a liking to each other, and they came to spend many interesting hours in each other's company after that initial meeting. Both were freedom lovers and independent women in their own right. Hilda was impressed by her new friend's deep knowledge of her country, imposing manners, and the precious insights into Egypt that Hoda gave her. But she was also an example to Hilda. A few years before, in 1923, Hoda, an elegant woman from the Egyptian aristocracy, herself part of a harem, arrived at Cairo railway station and was greeted by her fellow Egyptians. She was already known as a feminist then and was returning from an international women's conference in Rome. It's now or never. I have to do it. Hoda, you can do it. Just do it now. She convinced herself to do the unthinkable. Standing in full view of everyone, she slowly removed the veil covering her face, feeling the onlookers catching their breath. Now it's too late. It's finally done, she thought. Some followed her example then and there. Kefaya, kefaya, enough, enough, women were shouting. That was the beginning of the end for the harem system in Egypt. But some women are veiled, some aren't, seemingly regardless of their religion. It's all a mystery to me, said Hilda. In the countryside, women have always worked alongside the men since time immemorial and have never been veiled, Hilda explained. But poorer city women do put on a veil when they go out. Otherwise it's a class matter. The aristocratic women were veiled to distinguish themselves from the slaves who weren't. And it's considered chic to be as white as possible, you see, because that proves that the husband works enough for the wife not to have to. One of the safest ways to keep the skin out of the sun is a veil. In Sweden we don't have that problem. The long winters see to that. I don't know if I should continue, how long time I have, if I should continue to read or just to talk?
Talk.
Okay. Anyway, so my grandparents loved being in Egypt, and they never wanted to leave actually, but eventually they had to because the mixed courts closed, and that was in 1949, sorry. So they were here during the war, and during the war they didn't have to go back to Sweden. Well, they couldn't go back to Sweden, they couldn't cross Europe, and my mother was so happy because, you know, she wanted to be here with her friends, and they were in Alex swimming and having a great time. So for her it was like paradise. But then paradise ended, and they had to leave because his job finished. The courts closed. Slowly they went over to Egyptian courts and became entirely Egyptian, and it was very hard because for my mother especially, because that was the only country that she really knew. And anyways, eventually they left, and she married my father, you know, making a little jump here. They married my father, who's a diplomat, an attaché, and we started to come back to Egypt in the beginning of the 70s as a family. And in 75, my father was appointed Swedish ambassador to Cairo, so the family moved back. And then eventually I finished my school, I went to French school, and then I went to the AUC, to the American University in Cairo, and I stayed on here for about 8 years until the middle of the 80s, and moved to Paris then and worked at UNESCO and married and had my children and all this. So I had also a gap from Egypt until the beginning of the year 2000, when 9/11 happened in New York, and of course I was as shocked as everybody else and thinking, wow, I've been living in this country and everybody's so nice and gentle, what happened, you know? And I was intrigued, and by the time I'd also started to work as a journalist, so I wanted to reconnect. I'd been away for a while, so I came back, reconnected with many of my old friends, and started to travel back and forth, and I've been doing that quite a lot, both for the research of the book and also for the events that happened these past years. What I've seen with the media, also talking now as a journalist, is that we are also contributing to the fear-based societies that we all live in, whether in the West or the East. And I really want to promote peace journalism, and I think that's very important for us women. I think we are in a good position to do that, because often when we give the voice to the voiceless, which I try to do as a journalist, I think it's we probably view war in a different way than male correspondents do. So that's a bit my idea now in the future, is to continue to promote peace journalism, and hope that we can that way also give another image of the happenings in the world without it being so horror-based, but also giving hope to people and finding solutions. And I'm also part of VO, like Marwa, and I'm in the board and I represent Sweden in the Voice of Women Worldwide. And I invite you all to join because it's for free, it's just an open forum. And you can talk or not talk, or be as active or not as active as you wish. And my idea also for WOW is that we become a bit of an umbrella organization, because there are quite a few different women organizations, but we're all scattered here and there. And I think it would be nice if we could at least have a forum, a place where we can all discuss and say, well, now this conference is going on here and this is going on there, and I'm going to Egypt now, who do you know? Well, there's Mara here, and I'm in Sweden, and you're in Australia, and and in India, of course. And so I think that it's important, if we really want to have a voice, which we do, to promote peace, then we also have to cooperate and get together, and not be so focused on our own little movements, but be more open and be more cooperative. So, thank you all. Thank you.